Now we come into the next section, which a little bit before time, so I'm not sure if this is our first challenge. No, we're okay. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Susan Simpson. And I was introduced to Susan about 6 months when I was doing my first of the trainings that I've done this year for working online. And we started talking. She works at the University of Adelaide in South Australia, and I attended one of their conferences online. I like to think I was teleported, if you see what I mean. And it was a really interesting experience, and I was so impressed with what they've been doing in South Australia, where, of course, the miles really count, and that I asked her to come and present to us. And the reason I asked her to present to us was because of what they're doing with clients. And her research that she's been doing, and I'm sure she'll talk more about this, about the online client relationship, the therapeutic alliance. Because at the heart of today, and everything that I planned and our committee planned for today, it's about the client and ensuring that we provide them with what they want. We don't impose something on them. It's not about imposing. But it's about the client, and it's about how effective it is online. And so I asked her to write one of these real dare we type presentations, misquoting, I should say, from Carl Rogers' 1972 address to the APA, where he did an amazing address talking about various dare we's. And my dare we for us is, can we dare to be brave to think in a new way about what we're actually doing? And that's what I asked Susan to address in what she's going to speak to about today. So thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you, Philippa. And thank you much for the welcome and introduction. And I'm delighted to be participating in this conference, and especially delighted to be able to participate as a virtual attendee. So thank you very much for facilitating that. I guess what I'd like to cover over the next 50 minutes, I think I have, is to talk, first of all, a little bit about my background and experience with psychotechnologies, and then talk a little bit about what we know about psychotechnologies and clinical outcomes, and especially about the therapeutic relationship in that context, because, of course, there's a lot of, I guess, controversy around that and different opinions that people have about whether that's possible to develop a therapeutic relationship by video conferencing or other technologies. And finally, I'd like to look a little bit about where we go from here and look to the future. So next slide. That's slide 3 we should be on to. I would like to begin by briefly explaining how my own journey began into the use of psychotechnologies, and in particular the use of video conferencing for the provision of psychological therapies. Although I currently live and work in Adelaide, Australia, and work at the University of South Australia, I lived and worked in the NHS in Scotland, in Aberdeen, for over 13 years, until about 4 years ago. And for several years I provided a clinical psychology service to Shetland. And as you'll be aware, Scotland has quite a widely dispersed population with quite inequitable access to healthcare because of geographical barriers to accessing healthcare locally. And especially across rural areas and the highlands and islands, there's inequity to healthcare. Mental health services tend to be quite thinly spread, and especially access to specialist services such as eating disorders or substance misuse can be particularly variable. Before I began visiting Shetland, there were no adult mental health psychology or psychotherapy services provided through the NHS or otherwise in Shetland. And prior to my visits in Shetland, clients would be funded by the NHS to attend infrequent therapy sessions in Aberdeen. And these tend to be usually planned around Christmas shopping trips, I noticed. My first flight to Shetland was cancelled due to the thick sea fog, which is what's known as the Har up here. And so I ended up in the bowels of a creaky old ferry ship, making my way to Lerwick. And I began by visiting 4 times a year to carry out assessments. But it soon became clear that without someone to provide the treatments, the psychological or psychotherapy treatments, the assessment reports were redundant. So I therefore set about establishing a video therapy service. which involved weekly treatment clinics, low quality bandwidth, the old-fashioned ISDN lines. And we used in those days plain old computers with a webcam stuck on top, which had video conferencing software installed. My greatest challenges at that time were squabbles over ownership of computers before the days that we all had computers, and rooms, and squabbles over who would switch on and off the equipment, and general panic over how much competence and training it would require to switch the equipment on and off, as well as occasional weather interference with the ISDN connections, and also, of course, not understanding a word anyone in Shetland said to me when I first went up there. Clients attended sessions at the mental health unit in Lerwick, and I initially used the only video conferencing equipment available in the hospital system in Aberdeen. And this was eventually, this service for general psychology patients was extended eventually to develop a remote eating disorder service, which was staffed by the Aberdeen Multidisciplinary Eating Disorders team. And that provided an outreach, assessment and treatment service to a range of remote locations in northeast Scotland, Orkney and Shetland. And that's ongoing now, so that's been running for over 10 years. And that service has been very highly rated by clients who feel that and report that it tends to be more anonymous, and they feel it's also more expert than what they can access more locally. Whether or not that's true is another thing, but that's what's perceived. So began my interest in learning to use technology to fill gaps in service provision and to meet the need for psychotherapy services for people who otherwise might not have access to psychotherapy. My initial expectation was that it would be a simple substitute for in-person therapy with some minor adjustments. But what I was to learn was that through video conferencing and other such technologies, the therapist can create a unique therapeutic environment that can meet the needs of our clients in unexpected and often novel ways. Next slide, please. Slide 4. So as you will be aware, there has been a huge increase in internet usage over the past 10 years. Figures show a growth of 566.4% worldwide over the past 10 years, although, of course, this only represents about a third of the population across the world. In the UK, there are almost 53 million internet users at the last count at the end of 2011. Now, just to get us warmed up and make sure you're all awake, I just want to have a little competition. Just take a guess at which country you think has the highest percentage of population using the internet. So just put your hand up if you think it's Australia, Iceland, Japan, and UK. Okay. So in fact, latest figures from mid-2012 show Iceland actually has a 97.8% penetration rate. So almost everyone in the country has access to and regularly uses the internet. Australia is next at 89.8%, and the UK is 83.6% penetration, and then Japan at 80%. So next slide, number 7. As online technologies and access to the internet has increased, we've seen an exponential growth in both synchronous and asynchronous psychotechnologies, i.e. those technologies that are particularly useful for delivery of mental health care. Psychotechnologies currently play a role not only in traditional areas, such as working with mental health or psychological difficulties and self-development, but also growth in other areas, both within the medical and non-medical realms. And I think our possibilities for working in other areas are developing and growing greatly as psychotechnologies become more available. As I talk about the evidence base for the use of a range of psychotechnologies, I would like to encourage you to consider these questions in the background. First of all, have you ever personally used any technology for psychological purposes? And if so, what was your experience of using the technology? And I guess, what are your own expectations, both negative and positive, about the way in which different types of technology are likely to influence the therapeutic relationship, and whether your own preferences match those of your clients? So I'd just first of all like to talk a little bit about the effectiveness and the information we have, the studies that have been carried out to date on the effectiveness of psychotechnologies. Preliminary evidence suggests that online, both synchronous and asynchronous text-based therapies have shown clinical improvements across a wide range of clinical groups, including depression, panic disorder, complex grief, post-traumatic stress disorder, and eating disorders, as well as a range of other client groups. A recent meta-analysis of 12 randomised controlled trials by SPEC in 2007 indicated that internet-based CBT programs for depression and anxiety were effective, particularly those which involved actual therapists. These findings show promise for the potential effectiveness of internet-based programs. Another another review of randomised trials by Backhouse et al. 2012 identified 28 empirical studies reporting outcomes across a range of clinical problems, and concluded that in general clinical outcomes were roughly equivalent to in-person contact, and that was for video conferencing based services. In one study, Nelson 2003, video therapy appeared to lead to faster improvements than in the in-person condition. A study by Postel et al. 2008 emphasised that treatment efficacy is to a large degree dependent on the competence and knowledge of the therapist, highlighting the need to utilise well-trained professional technotherapists in future research in this area. So there's a real, importance of ensuring that we have high-quality training for therapists who work in this area. Similar conclusions were drawn in a review by Lisa Richardson in 2009, which was also looking at the evidence base for video therapy, who found that the existing preliminary evidence and anecdotal reports suggest that effectiveness appears equivalent across a range of clinical groups, including rural populations, incarcerated patients, children and adolescents, and older adults, and that this treatment modality may in fact enhance outcomes for some client groups. That it may actually be better than face-to-face treatment or in-person treatment for some client groups. Similar methodological difficulties were identified across a range of these reviews, with the majority of studies reporting small samples, heterogeneous samples, so a range of different client groups, all included in the same sample, and too few studies focused on any one clinical group to really make any far-reaching conclusions. Another recent study, the study by Postel, found that of 14 identified randomised controlled trials of e-therapy, only 5 were methodologically rigorous. So it's clear that we need, a greater rigorous research to be carried out in this area and adequately powered studies. The most consistently reported outcome for mental health research in this area, for e-therapies, in various settings and subject samples, is that of satisfaction. The research provides strong evidence of high patient satisfaction and moderately to high provider satisfaction. And even when there are technological problems that have been reported, even when you're using very low quality bandwidth, as I was in Shetland when I first set up that service, it's amazing how high the patient satisfaction is rated. And studies that have compared telepsychotherapy to face-to-face psychotherapy reported similar satisfaction levels between the conditions. Now, the next slide that I'm going to show you is actually a video clip, just to give you a sense of the novel ways in which video conferencing and online technologies have been used in sports psychology in Australia in recent times. And this video was recorded by the chief sports psychologist for the Australian men's hockey team last week after winning the World Cup in the Netherlands. for that slide 10.
Hi, I'm Corinne Reid. I'm one of the psychologists for the Australian men's hockey team, also known as the Kookaburras. We have just hopped off the bus from our grand final performance in the Netherlands and have come away as the new hockey world champions. So it's a pretty exciting day here. One of the features of our program over the last couple of years that's made a significant contribution to our team's development and performance is our telepsychology program. We have a real challenge, as do many international sports, with players who have commitments around the world playing in different international hockey leagues for periods of time. And one of the consequences of that is that it's really difficult in a team sport to develop a cohesion, a sense of group and of togetherness and of knowing each other when the players are perhaps only in the same city as each other for certain chunks of time each year. So what we decided to do in response to that challenge was to introduce telepsychology. That has allowed our team of 3 psychologists to keep in touch with their individual player clients as well as their individual coach clients, and perhaps even more importantly, to run weekly group sessions where our entire team can be together virtually, whether they be with us in Perth, and often there's a room of about 20 people in Perth, but then there will be multiple different locations where players are based, and they will tune in to our sessions from those locations. So we'll have a big screen on the wall with lots of different faces in different places. People can then either ask questions if the technology is working well that night, and if timing is not an issue, they can ask questions and contribute directly. And if there are delays or lags in the visual presentation, then they can send in their questions by text and contribute to the discussion that way. These group therapy sessions have been amazing in terms of being able to keep players in touch with each other, to keep them on top of whatever the issues are that the team is facing together, rather than just those people who are in Perth. And I guess that what's testament to the value of this new approach for us is that players who perhaps have a time zone difference of many hours are prepared to tune in at 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning if it means that they get to touch base with their teammates on a weekly basis. And what we find is sometimes before the sessions and even after the sessions, players stay online to catch up informally with one another and find out what's going on with family and friends, as well as to hear the messages and work on the issues that we're working on more formally as a team. So for myself and our other 2 psychologists, Vance Locke and Catherine Campbell, this has been a really wonderful experiment in how to glue people together, even though they're thousands of miles apart. It's been a challenge for us as psychologists in rethinking our preconceptions about boundaries and about what being in the room means, about how to build and hold relationships and authentic relationships at a distance, how to convey unconditionality and positive regard when we're thousands of miles apart and lots of different people are all tuned in from different places. But it's worked remarkably well. And so this is our challenge for the next year as new reigning world champions, is to do even better next time around and to make sure that we introduce our new players to the wonders of technology even sooner in their careers, so that it becomes second nature to them, something that they don't even think about, they just assume that will happen. Anyway, signing off from Den Haag. I hope you enjoy your conference. Bye.
Great, thank you, Corinne. Okay, so now on to slide 11. So given that we have several reviews which suggest that we have good evidence that, or good preliminary evidence anyway, that e-therapies and video therapy are roughly equivalent to face-to-face therapy and in some cases preferable, why are psychotechnologies so slow to take off, and why are clinicians afraid to take the leap? Low uptake rates and service surveys suggest that many clinicians who have not used technology for psychotherapy remain sceptical about the feasibility of this medium of care. One study demonstrated that clinical psychologists reported lower therapeutic alliance indices in telepsychology conditions, when they were randomly assigned to evaluate exactly the same session conducted via face-to-face or video conferencing. So they actually rated it when they were watching the same dialogue and with the same people. They rated the therapeutic alliance as lower in the video conferencing condition. In one other study by Schopp, Johnson and Merrill, they compared 49 face-to-face neuropsychological interviews with 49 interviews via video conferencing. So there was 49 face-to-face and 49 by video conferencing. Results indicated there were no difference in the psychologist's reports or recommendations, and there was a high level of customer satisfaction with both conditions, along with lower costs associated with the telepsychology condition. But despite these positives, psychologists expressed dissatisfaction with using telepsychology to deliver services. And the authors concluded it is ironic that equipment difficulties such as connection problems, indistinct audio and slight desynchrony between audio and video appeared to be more problematic for psychologists than for brain-injured clients. That tells us something. So why have therapists been reluctant to move forward? 3 possible reasons. It seems to be that therapists hold a belief that technology cannot facilitate the therapeutic alliance and that the screen is a barrier to connection. Many therapists experience a lack of exposure or use to psychotechnology, and some have speculated that the prospect of taking the relationship out of the traditional office setting may trigger potential anxieties around loss of control and power, fears around boundaries becoming more fluid, and changes of working with interpersonal phenomena such as transference through the use of technology. And maybe also our own fears around change or not being the only expert in the room. Next slide, slide 12. Clinicians currently have limited opportunities to gain training and supervised experience in this area, which might otherwise allay many of their concerns and address negative expectations. The fact that Medicare rebates in Australia can only be claimed for in-person sessions has further impeded the development of psychotechnologies in the domain of private practice. Public mental health services have also been slow to embrace the advantages associated with utilising technology in the delivery of therapeutic services, disregarding potentially large cost savings and more seamless multidisciplinary treatment delivery, with only a few notable exceptions. In fact, there was a report on the use of technology in the NHS called Technology in the NHS, Transforming the Patient's Experience of Care, in 2008, which made a number of recommendations to improve uptake of technology in the NHS, including national leadership by the Department of Health, placing a legal duty on strategic health authorities to promote innovation in order to improve customer experience and provide more convenient access to services, ensuring that new trials contribute to the evidence base and that the trials will be appropriately acted on, which is where things often go wrong. The evidence comes out, but nothing changes. And better communication with customers, including clinicians encouraging patients to make full use of technology services available. Now, that report was in 2008, and I'm not too sure how many of those recommendations have actually been carried forward. It is well established that a positive therapeutic alliance is one of the strongest factors associated... Sorry, this is slide 13. It's well established that a positive alliance is one of the strongest factors associated with outcome in in-person psychotherapy. So is the scepticism around therapeutic rapport justified? And what do we know about therapeutic rapport and the use of technology? A recent review of e-therapies by Sukala 2012, which included synchronous and asynchronous text-based modalities, found 11 studies in English that had investigated therapeutic alliance. In spite of technological difficulties, that in general the results suggested roughly equivalent outcome, again for online and face-to-face or in-person therapy. 3 studies indicated a positive association between treatment outcome and therapeutic alliance, and 1 study indicated significantly higher levels of alliance in the online condition. Another review of 12 text-based online therapy interventions with 574 clients and 18 therapists by Reynolds in 2012 came to similar conclusions, with text-based online participants reporting either equivalent alliance or greater alliance when compared with previous therapeutic studies carried out in an in-person setting. And a more recent study reported by the same authors compared online therapy conducted with 30 clients and 30 therapists and found that alliance was in many respects more positive than those previously reported in an in-person setting. And importantly, findings indicated that the central factors that influenced alliance and impact in an in-person setting, such as symptom severity, social support, therapist orientation, therapeutic orientation, were of less confluence in an online setting, which suggests that that online therapy, in the way that alliance develops in online and psychotechnology-based therapies, may develop in quite a different way, and there may be different factors involved than affect therapy in an in-person setting. Again, with these studies, there were methodological shortcomings, and this included incomplete reporting of results, lack of control groups, small sample sizes, and of course these are things that need to be addressed in future studies in this area. Slide 14. Email has also been associated with strong therapeutic alliance, both as the sole modality of therapy and as a treatment adjunct. A qualitative analysis of interviews conducted with 6 online therapists by Fletcher Tomenius, 2009, found that quality and pace of the development of therapeutic alliance and trust were actually enhanced by the anonymity afforded by online modalities. The authors described greater disinhibition and openness, that in fact email allows people to express themselves without feeling restrained by being watched or scrutinised, and also described a more neutral power balance, whereby clients being able to access their therapy and think about their therapy within their own space, within their own homes or wherever else they might be, allowed this to equalise the power balance in the therapeutic relationship. Similar findings were reported by Dunn, 2012, who carried out a qualitative analysis of semi-structured interviews with 10 former email counselling clients and 6 email counsellors. And she found that asynchronous communication provides both therapists and clients with time to think before responding, that they don't feel on the spot or pressured or intimidated to speak or to respond immediately. Participants consistently reported that the safety and protection offered by the online therapy environment helped them to overcome the high levels of shame and fear of engagement that had averted them from seeking help in the past. However, sometimes therapists have reported experiencing difficulties with the technology, and 2 recent Australian studies by King, 2006, and Bambling, 2008, found that counsellors working with children and adolescents reported lower alliance in the online therapy condition compared with telephone. But just to reiterate, that was the therapist-rated alliance rather than the client-rated alliance. They suggested that as younger generations often use text language that the counsellor might not be familiar with, the alliance can become strained and ruptured due to misunderstandings. So it may be that moving between the asynchronous and synchronous forms of communication, counsellors might not have fully had the opportunity to make adjustments and learned the lingo of text-based communication with this generation, which again highlights the importance of training in specific types of therapy, and being competent in in-person therapy might not necessarily translate to being competent in working with text-based therapy or with video therapy, that they all have their own idiosyncratic requirements and etiquette that needs to be taken into account. Slide 15. Adjunctive therapies. There are a range of therapies that are becoming available as adjuvant or adjunct therapies to in-person or video conferencing-based therapies. One such approach is the TechNob project, which there are more and more papers being published on this project. It's a 13-month program for obesity, consisting of 1 month inpatient treatment and 12 months of video therapy and mobile health outpatient treatment. And this study is based in Italy, and it's a very interesting project because they're using video conferencing to help encourage people to maintain the gains that they have made in an inpatient setting by encouraging people on the go in their everyday lives through video conferencing on their mobile phones. So encouraging people to make the right choices in terms of healthy diet and exercise and other areas, providing that psychological support on the go, if you like. Similarly, a recent study by myself and Lisa Richards investigated the way in which therapeutic rapport was influenced through the introduction of a telehealth platform called GoAct Journal. Clinicians used a range of GoAct functions, including tracking clinical outcomes. So clients filled out questionnaires online, and we were able to look from a week-to-week basis. We used the core outcome measures, so we were able to monitor improvement on a week-to-week basis and also risk on a week-to-week basis. We were able to monitor client progress between sessions, also carry out secure online messaging and text messaging to provide support, to look at homework exercises together and that sort of thing. Analysis of the quantitative and qualitative data suggests that GoAct played a pivotal role in enhancing engagement and therapeutic alliance as it became interfused with the client's day-to-day reality. Clients described having a real sense that their therapist was committed and available to them and that they were being held and valued even outside sessions. As one client said, it wasn't just a see you once a week and then forget about it. It was more of a continuation, like an interest in the client and the therapist, like going both ways. They describe a greater sense of presence, just like she felt a bit more present, just felt like it was a resource that I had close to me that I could still use. Even when the therapist was only minimally accessing the messages, like once a week between sessions, it still really contributed to that sense of presence and rapport. And in addition, engagement in therapy was in turn enhanced by the stronger therapeutic alliance. As one client said, I'd quite liked my therapist from the start, so GoAct is good, like another foundation of trust. Just because I think it's like a commitment that you make to each other. Like she has to be there for me to do it, and then like I've got to do it for her. So I think it builds a better relationship and the trust a bit further. There was also evidence of the disinhibition effect, where the technology facilitated accurate self-disclosure, and clients also described feeling a greater sense of connection with the therapist, which in turn enhanced the therapeutic bond. That's slide 16. Slide 17. Finally, therapeutic alliance is often a variable of interest in video conferencing research. In a recent review of 47 empirical articles reviewing intervention-based telepsychology, 34% examined the patient-provider relationship in therapy. So that was 16 studies that looked at the therapeutic alliance. And a recent review found 24 studies that had examined therapeutic alliance in the context of video therapy over the past 23 years. Although the wide range of technologies, such as Skype, ISDN and IP-based video conferencing and FaceTime, and clinical groups being studied made comparisons difficult, some themes did emerge. The great majority of studies of therapeutic alliance in telepsychotherapy conclude that patients and providers perceive a strong therapeutic alliance over video conferencing, which is comparable to that reported for in-person sessions, with clients rating bond and presence that were commensurable with ratings of in-person settings across a range of clinical populations. Both therapists and clients rated high levels of therapeutic alliance, although in general clients rated higher levels in the earlier phase of treatment, suggesting that it takes longer for therapists to adjust to the new technology than it does for clients. There was some evidence that therapists found it easier to communicate with children and teenagers by video conferencing due to their familiarity with the technology for gaming and communication. only 2 of the studies reported higher reliance in the in-person condition. One of these studies was investigating group anger management for veterans with PTSD, and the other was with family therapy with teenagers diagnosed with epilepsy. So it seems that in the group setting, it might not be as easy to adjust to as in-person therapy. Similarly, there's evidence that online communication may, in fact, enable intimacy by increasing opportunities to connect with others. So the overwhelming, I guess, information that we have suggests that in many cases, because of the disinhibition effect, because of the greater connection, it may, in fact, enhance therapeutic alliance through the use of psychotechnologies, but there are some exceptions to this. Slide 18. It's been suggested that in video therapy, therapists tend to be more active and emphatic in expressing empathy and warmth, with several studies noting a heavier reliance on verbal gestures to convey understanding and support. So it seems that when we're using different technologies, we actually adjust the way that we express ourselves as therapists, and maybe need to find different or new ways of expressing empathy and warmth rather than relying on the same ways that we use in in-person settings. Clinicians who are experienced in this field have developed ways of checking in more regularly with their clients for clarification regarding gestures and facial expressions so that they can attune themselves to their clients' emotional states. Indeed, video conferencing may enhance communication by slowing down interactions through turn-taking, paying greater attention to social cues, and heightening responsivity to emotions. There are several studies which support that. Preliminary evidence suggests that clients may be more active in video conferencing sessions as well, which may be linked to the democratising effect of being situated in their own territory with responsibility for their own remote control and screen. It seems that video therapy clients tend to adopt more of an equal responsibility for initiating and participating in dialogue than in a conventional in-person setting. So this offers the opportunity for clients who are fearful of engagement or attachment to play with the experience of closeness and distance whilst retaining some sense of personal control. Numerous studies have reported that clients indicated that they experience video therapy as less embarrassing and confrontational, feeling less scrutinised, less self-conscious than in-person contact, thus facilitating expression of difficult feelings and a greater sense of personal control. And again, this may be particularly important, as I was mentioning earlier, for other e-therapies. It may be particularly important for dealing with shame-related issues, including sexual abuse, body image disorders, eating disorders, and so forth. The next slide is a video of Lisa Richardson, who has conducted a PhD in this area and is talking a little bit about therapeutic alliance that she found in her study with video therapy work. So that's slide 19.
As part of a PhD project, we conducted a research study to investigate the feasibility of engaging in psychotherapy with rural and remote mental health community clinic clients. During the 11-month intervention period, I conducted 68 hours of psychotherapy via telepsych with 8 different clients. At the time, the sessions were conducted via ISDN and the closed WA Health Department system at an average of 256 kilobits, which is actually only about 80% quality of a television broadcast. One of the purposes of our research was to determine if the absence of personal contact as well as physical presence precluded or impeded the development of telepresence, or that sense of actually being in the same room with each other, as well as to look at the degree to which this impacted on the development of rapport, alliance, clinical outcomes and consumer satisfaction. The clients of this study completed technical, process and therapy-based satisfaction surveys after each session, in addition to clinical symptom ratings. The matched client and therapist Agnew relationship measure, or the ARM, was administered after every session to assess the therapeutic alliance. This particular measure captures 5 components of therapeutic rapport, including bond, partnership, confidence, openness, and client initiative. Over the 11-month intervention, there were numerous technical difficulties, even over above the pretty ordinary transmission quality. Some of those technical difficulties included things like pixelation, blurriness, sound synchronization and disconnection problems, ambient sound problems and echoing, and numerous occasions of sound cancellation when the therapist and the client spoke at the same time. On the Agnew relationship measure, the baseline levels of alliance were very high for the therapist and the client, although slightly lower for the client at the very beginning of the treatment. Over the course of the treatment, both the client and therapist ratings of alliance indicated improvement over time. The mean client alliance rating scores improved to a level of clinical significance over the therapy. However, therapist ratings didn't really change very much at all, although when they did change, they changed in a positive direction. Overall, the client ratings indicated an increase in positive feelings toward the therapist, the working relationship, and the intervention in general. In contrast, only the therapist ratings of openness, so feelings that the client was fully disclosing all thoughts, feelings and concerns, that's the only one that actually increased from the first to the last session for the therapist. What became apparent from our research is really that the same issues that surround the development and maintenance of the client-therapist relationship exist in telepsychology just as they do in traditional forms of psychotherapy. The therapeutic relationship can absolutely be challenged by the technological constraints of telepsychology, but the process of kind of reaching out to provide a service for isolated clients, as well as that problem-solving process, that collaboration through the technical glitches, can actually be quite a bonding experience for both the practitioner and the client. It kind of changes the dynamic. In our research, for some clients, the distancing that was provided by the telepsychology medium also offered them a real sense of safety and sanctuary, particularly for those clients who were dealing with shame-based issues. For at least one of my clients, we achieved much more therapeutically because I was never actually in the same room as him. Further, we come to recognise that the importance of not underestimating the power of choice in change. When clients make a commitment to the process of therapy, which is even more explicit because they choose to continue with sessions despite numerous technical problems, they're more likely to commit to the change they search for in sessions and then succeed in their effort. So conducting telepsychology absolutely feels different to a typical face-to-face session, but that doesn't necessarily feel better or worse. My impression is that overall, if telepsychology is not treated apologetically or like a poor cousin, it can achieve therapeutic results, albeit by a very different route, but they can be as robust as those that are achieved in their face-to-face therapeutic encounters. I think telepsychology is always worth a go.
Okay, so now we're to slide 20. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the study that was carried out in the University of South Australia last year, where I'm based. In Australia, all masters and doctoral programs in clinical psychology are expected to provide an internal placement before students under their external practicum. And at the University of South Australia, master's students have a year-long placement at our internal psychology clinic. And during that time, they're expected to see at least one videotherapy client at all times throughout the placement. So 18 months after the our videotherapy clinic began, we undertook an initial analysis of the data, and we looked at 20 videotherapy and 82 face-to-face clients in our initial analyses. Clients in the videotherapy condition live in Port Augusta or in the remote areas around Port Augusta, which is a remote regional centre over 300 kilometres north of Adelaide. And we also have an outpost from there at Roxby Downs, which is further inland. As you can see, the primary diagnosis for the rural group were mostly classified as the anxiety-based disorders, mostly post-traumatic stress disorder, whereas a slightly higher number of the in-person condition were given a primary diagnosis of depression. And the videotherapy clients showed significantly higher levels of depressive and anxiety symptoms at pre-treatment compared to the face-to-face condition. So a much higher level of, distress, psychopathology, and a much higher number of clients had a lower education level and were unemployed, whereas most of the in-person client group was people who'd been highly educated or who were currently engaged in postgraduate education. Slide 21. All clients who were interviewed had completed at least 5 to 6 sessions in the 2013 academic year, and semi-structured interviews were conducted via the same modalities that have been utilised for psychotherapy sessions, so either face-to-face or by video conferencing. Slide 22. 6 video therapy participants, 3 males and 3 females, were asked a range of questions about their experience of video therapy. Slide 23. The results of this qualitative analysis can be summarised in this table, and we conducted a content analysis in which we identified categories and subcategories. And briefly, you can see that all the clients expressed initial concerns regarding this type of therapy, but these concerns dissolved after 2 to 3 sessions. All the clients reported that this type of therapy had been beneficial to them, and all the clients reported that they had established a positive relationship with their therapist. At slide 24, both the remote and local clients for the same group of postgrad psychology students filled out a core arm. This was the same questionnaire that Lisa talked about in her video clip, following each session, so a very short measure of therapeutic alliance. The means and standard deviations of the 2 groups of clients were quite similar, and an independent t-test between the 2 groups revealed that there were no statistically significant differences between the group in terms of the therapeutic alliance that was rated by clients. So these results suggest that master's students obtained similar results, similar levels of therapeutic alliance, whether the sessions were conducted via traditional face-to-face sessions or via video conferencing. Slide 25. So, does technology affect alliance, and if so, how? Well, in fact, current evidence suggests that the therapeutic bond is often enhanced in unexpected ways by the use of technology. Findings from research focused on both asynchronous and synchronous psychotechnologies have identified the way in which engagement of psychotechnologies appear to create a neutral therapeutic space that can change the power imbalance of the therapeutic relationship. In a traditional in-person setting, the room and furniture is owned and controlled by the therapist, thus heightening the power differential between participants. When we use psychotechnologies, it changes that power dynamic. As cyberspace is not owned by either the therapist or the client, the relationship becomes more democratic, often facilitating a more fluid and freer dynamic to develop, where the client becomes empowered to actively participate in their own part in the therapeutic process. The therapist's role thus shifts from being the expert to more of a facilitator of therapeutic dialogue. Thus, the change in power dynamics and the neutralising effect of cyberspace may in fact catalyse the effects of therapy, rather than acting as a hindrance or an impediment to be overcome. Slide 26. As psychotherapy becomes increasingly common in the realm of cyberspace, conventional notions of where and how therapeutic boundaries are set up and the way in which the work of therapy takes place are challenged. But by being open to work with boundaries in a creative and conscious way, a number of studies suggest that the therapist can facilitate a level of closeness or bond that might not otherwise be possible. So I think it's not about, although the boundaries change, it's about being able to openly explore the way in which the boundaries change and what the boundaries are. It's about putting it out there and being, I think, using it as part of the therapeutic work. It's also been suggested that a more neutral therapeutic environment created in cyberspace can facilitate transference reactions that are more reality-based and more meaningful. In fact, transference and counter-transference can be powerfully experienced in the context of online therapies. And Kate Dunn has written quite a lot about this. And as these are manifested by text, these inner reactions can be more concretely observed and explicitly explored and addressed in therapy. Dunn describes how online therapies can enhance the therapeutic relationship by providing a neutral canvas for expressions of parts of the self that have previously been concealed or unrecognised. Clients tend to be unrestricted by their physical self, especially in text-based therapies, and the way they perceive others to see their physical self, thus freeing them to express their authentic experience and in particular vulnerabilities, without feeling unsafe or exposed. Slide 27. So who benefits most? There are many for whom technology offers an opportunity to access treatments which would otherwise be unobtainable for them, including those living geographically in rural and remote areas, the elderly, those impaired by mobility or health issues, and the incarcerated. In Australia, distances between urban and rural locations are often vast, with many clients unable to regularly travel to a centre unless they have their own helicopter. And they often access schooling through School of the Air, especially people living in remote farms in the middle of the country, and they often access medical assistance from the Royal Flying Doctors Service. So those living in rural towns often describe a lack of anonymity if they went to see a local fly-in, fly-out psychologist. Or a psychotherapist, anyone who goes to see that person when they fly into town, then the whole town knows about it. So psychotechnologies, and in this case online therapies such as Skype or text-based therapies, may offer a unique solution to these populations, improving access and equitability in healthcare. And although the evidence to date is not great, preliminary evidence suggests that there may be some client groups who might be more likely to benefit from these psychotherapies, technology-driven psychotherapies, especially populations that have shown difficulty engaging in traditional in-person settings, such as avoidant personality disorder perhaps, social phobia, those on the autistic spectrum disorder, and maybe shame-based disorders, whereby the psychotechnologies may in fact facilitate engagement. Slide 28. In line with the UKCP's main charitable aim, i.e. to promote the art and science of psychotherapy for public benefit, we must ask ourselves how we can adapt to a changing world whilst keeping our clients at the centre of their own care. As psychotherapists, the time has come to challenge ourselves. Can we move beyond our comfort zone and question our basic assumptions about what makes psychotherapy successful, including the widely held belief that conventional in-person treatment methods are the gold standard for everyone? Indeed, if we are utilising a client-centred model, is it time to ask ourselves whether we are truly meeting the needs of the clients of the 21st century in a way that matches their specific requirements, lifestyles and circumstances? How do we shape psychotherapy in the future to provide greater continuity of care and more integrated services? How do we find ways to promote the wider provision of psychotherapy to all sections of the public and reach into people's day-to-day lives in order to support them in making the changes they seek in a way which feels encouraging rather than intrusive? We can no longer hold off by using the rationale that technology-based services might not be as effective. The evidence base is growing and is strongly in favour of technology-based services, both in terms of effectiveness of outcomes, therapeutic rapport and patient satisfaction. As psychotherapists, we need to consider that if we don't utilise the technologies now available to us, this may constitute neglect of our responsibilities as practitioners to meet requirements for best practice. So the question is no longer whether or not technologies have a place in the world of psychotherapy, but how can we galvanise ourselves to foresee the potential benefits and risks ahead and equip ourselves to meet the challenge? We must work with the evidence that's already available and recognise that our deepest resistance may in fact come from within ourselves. There is a need for both national and international professional organisations to take responsibility for development of guidelines in collaboration with those who are currently researching the field. Legal guidelines need to be assembled in order to clarify the boundaries of responsibility. And this also has implications for the various variations in qualifications and competency-based training standards, which vary from country to country. So as someone said recently, we've had more pilots than Qantas. When are we going to start applying the evidence base and develop ongoing integrated routine services which utilise technologies to meet the needs of our clients? It's time for public health services to embrace new and innovative ways of utilising psychotechnologies to improve efficiency and outcomes in public health service settings. High-quality research is urgently needed into the effectiveness of different forms of technology as alternatives and as adjuncts to current practices. There is ample evidence that psychotechnologies are effective. Our challenge for the future is to consider how we can improve our proficiency and how we can work out and understand what works best for whom in order to best meet the needs of our clients. And finally, slide 29, research consistently suggests that the online therapeutic environment offers new and unexpected opportunities for interpersonal relating and connection. In turn, this offers the potential for new possibilities for the development of therapeutic alliance. Further, we need to allow our clients to drive our passage into psychotechnologies and to stick with their storyline. This is ultimately more powerful for getting policies changed and for bringing about developments which are in tune with consumer need. People are already coming to us and saying, I want to have an e-therapist at home. I don't want to travel in. Most of us are caught in the transit between in-person and psychotechnologies and therefore still view these as adjunct therapies, instead of being a gold standard in their own right. We need to think about the language we use and stop referring to psychotechnologies as secondary or second-best options to face-to-face. We need to challenge our assumptions about why we charge less for services that are delivered via psychotechnologies. The time has come for us to move on from dipping in and out and to take the lead in establishing processes and systems for training, education and research in this area. There's growing evidence that the digital natives of the younger generation who have grown up with technology as an integral part of everyday life are increasingly demanding services that match their needs in the world as they experience it. Our own future as professionals will be dependent on our ability to coordinate our efforts to meet the demands of clients in the digital age. And finally, to quote Philippa Weeks, if you can bear the pain of change, the possibilities are great. Thank you very much.